Thank you very much for coming along to listen to what I've got to say. Adrian Culley, technical consultant for Dambala for the whole of the world except North America. I was previously at Access Data and Guidance Software, two of the main forensic providers. I was also headed up Forensics UK for PricewaterhouseCoopers, and before that I was an officer at Scotland Yard in high-tech crime and intelligence for 15 years. We've got a lot of ground to cover today. There is no audio system in here. Hopefully, can those of you at the back hear me okay? I'm only little, but I've got a big voice. If you can't, please put your hand up or shout. And, I'm going to cover a lot of ground. I'm going to say some things you may agree with. I'm going to say some things you may not agree with. There's an issue with this industry and what we're going to talk about, which I've just chatted to the gentleman at the front about, which is those who know do not tell, and those who tell do not know. So please feel free to disregard everything I say to you today, because I'm starting from the basis of I don't know what I'm talking about. So if you sort of hold that as an overarching, you won't be disappointed. Okay, so you've seen my sexy title, Bot Out of Hell. Unfortunately, it's not about meatloaf and motorbikes, and what we're talking about is bots, and I'm going to go through some opening statements, but then we're going to get onto some definitions, and we're going to burst some balloons, and I make no apologies for that. We're going to tread on a few sacred cows in this presentation. But society has changed. We're now a digital society. There has been a digital revolution. It has happened. And I'll show this slide to make my point. 30 years ago, if there was a power outage, depending on your political persuasion, you would either have said 30 years ago, bloody miners, or bloody Thatcher. Today, you're much more likely to say we've been hacked. Society has changed. 30 years ago, parents were concerned when their children weren't under their supervision, have my children joined a gang and do I know about it? Have they joined a gang and do I not know about it? Today, that's still valid. I'm not here to give you social engineering answers to that particular challenge, but today there's another problem. Has my computer joined a gang and I don't know about it? Society has changed. And this is what we mean by botnet, but I'm going to get into some definitions in a moment because there's a lot of nonsense out there at the moment. And then we're going to talk about this fella we call Spike. This is a bad thing. This is a piece of malware or a blended threat. And we'll get on to talking about how the world has changed and how this affects us. But let's look at some definitions. Cyberspace is bandied all around this particular conference. And who first came up with the term cyberspace? The author William Gibson, in these two, a short story initially and then a novel, 1994 and 1986. Where did he get the term cyberspace from? He took it from the academic Norbert Wiener, who wrote a very influential book to this day on cybernetics. Cybernetics is a massive field of science that goes all the way from artificial intelligence through to machine behaviour, through to cyborg blending human, massive area of science. And the term was invented by Norbert Friedman. Where did Norbert Friedman get the term from? I'm sorry, we're very Heath Robinson. I have to hit the laptop every time, so please don't feel... So where did Norbert Friedman get the term cybernetics from? And the reason that we're going through this is I want you all to know what the word cyber actually means. Because when sales and marketing meet technical and academic, they rarely produce good-looking children. And cyber is scattered about at the moment as a prefix, and with most people using the term not having a clue what it means. It comes from the Greek kybernetes, which means steer or control. That's very important because that's going to come on to everything else that's been talked about in the last month, and it's very topical at the moment. It is not, as it tends to be used, a prefix meaning vaguely electronic and maybe connected to the thing that's called the internet. A bit like E. E seems to have dropped out a little bit. I always ask the question at these speaking opportunities, why is it that we have e-crime but cyber terrorism? Is it possibly because intelligence agency officers went to better universities than law enforcement officers? It's for no other reason. The actual thing is exactly the same thing. But my point here is it's really important to go back to what does cyber actually mean, because it's very important. because it becomes absolutely relevant as to what's going on in terms of attacks. Internet, in fact, interestingly, Vince Cerf just got a very important award in the UK this week. The guy that came up with the phrase internet. This particular RFC from 1974 defines, and it's the first time that the word internet was used. And very simply, Vince Cerf and a couple of other people defined the internet as being a network of networks. But that's very important as well. Another reason for that I mentioned, of course, is internet's one of these strange, specious words that we all use it every day, a bit like the number 0, but we use it to mean anything and everything. We use it without much precision as to what does it actually mean. And I'm not professing to say any definitions are right or wrong, but it's just interesting to go back to the source, and that Vince Cerf, who's the man that made the word, said it's a network of networks. Botnet, which is what I want to talk to you about today, is actually short for robot network. And it means a small subsection of that network of networks that's joined together. Now, interestingly, of itself, botnet doesn't necessarily imply malicious. It's generally used that way, but it could be used for lawful purposes. There's a botnet you can join for DNA research that will use your spare processing capacity to process the human genome. But that's been completed, but there's other work still being done. There are botnets for cancer research that you can join and again, make your computing capacity available. Sadly, there are many hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of botnets for nefarious purposes. But that's what a botnet is, a robot network. The cloud, well, we're not going to really talk about that today, but I mentioned that briefly again because everybody talks about this thing, the cloud, as if it's some new, which is why it's important to understand what the internet is. The cloud is a business service. It's not a thing or a place, or at most, it's a concept. If anybody's trying to sell you something for the cloud, you almost certainly don't need it, and you almost certainly won't use it. And ask anybody speaking to you about the cloud to define it for you. And I've put up there for you, you can go and download it yourself. NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology in the USA, have actually produced a document defining the cloud. But it's quite complex. 3 service models, and 4 delivery models, and 5 separate characteristics per many 5 from 3 from 2. But you find anybody speaking to you about the cloud, do please pin them down and say, what do you mean? What is that? Zero-day attack, one of my other hobby horses. Really, really unhelpful. Zero-day attack for whom? It's certainly not a zero-day attack for the hostile foreign intelligence service that's spent 20 years writing this exploitative attack. It might be a 0 day for the victim who's just found it, but even for the victim who's just found it, it's actually likely to have been there for quite some time. Very misleading language, and the language is important. So, keeping on a pace, just a little bit of back history. Computer viruses, advanced threats, blended threats are not computer viruses. A moving component may be a computer virus, but where did we get computer viruses from? Well, Fred Cohen's PhD thesis in 1986 is the first recent use of the actual phrase computer virus. Now, very interestingly as well, he gives some taxonomy, but there is no standard taxonomy for computer viruses like there is for medical viruses. Medical viruses are very, very highly defined because they have to be for treatment. Computer viruses, the world has been used to playing fast and loose with, hence all these sexy journalistic names. You know, I've got zombie death stealth killer. You know, why? Because it looks good in print. Nothing to do with what's actually happening. Not really helpful, but it's actually far older. The first documentation I'm aware of academically of a computer virus is John von Neumann. If anybody ever tells you that Alan Turing's the father of computing, then John von Neumann's the grandfather of computing. And he came up with the concept of a, as it says there, self-reproducing universal constructor in this paper way back in 1949. And that's exactly what a computer virus is. It replicates. So nothing new about this. Hacking. Where do we get hacking from? Kurt Gödel, interestingly, one of the modules of the Gauss attack is called Gödel, after him. So the people who are behind that particular attack really do know their stuff. He wrote in 1931 in his PhD thesis, which his thesis went on to be what Alan Turing used as the basis of his PhD thesis, and Alan Turing's PhD thesis actually references Kurt Gödel. But he wrote that basically, in summary, and it is a trite summary, I don't mean to upset anybody academically today, but to put it into a single phrase, any axiomatic system can be broken. If it's a set of rules, there'll be something that makes the rules not work. That sounds like a trivial thing. It's actually a very deep and powerful thing, because it means there can't be a single set of mathematical rules to describe the universe. You're probably all aware there are three sorts of mathematician. Those who are good at it and those who aren't. Some of you got that joke, some of you didn't. And wait. So, one last definition, because this really does... the security solution that Dan Barler offers, which I'm not here to talk to you about today, I want to talk about what's actually going on, but it's so powerful it'll make your hair fall out, as you can see. I see some of you may have been using it, but this does keep me up at night. I did mention earlier, sales and marketing meets technical and academic, don't produce pretty children. Advanced persistent threat, this is so misused at the moment, even here at this event. What does this mean? Where does it come from? Well, let me tell you what it actually is. An advanced persistent threat is a threat actor, i.e. a hostile third party, a nation state, whether it's military or intelligence service, or a criminal. It is absolutely not, which is how it's becoming frequently commonly used, an anomaly. APT actually it comes from the American military parlance in the mid-90s, and it started off as a euphemism for the Chinese government. And it's really simple. It's come to mean, as we say here, any hostile threat actor. But the definition is really straightforward. Advanced means they know more than we do. Persistent means they're not going to go away. And threat means they're hostile. It is not, absolutely not, an Uber virus. Hey, I've got a new super Acme gizmo that will defend you against APTs. Well, really? You've got a bit of technology that deals with the Chinese government? That's so impressive. Load of nonsense. What the problem out there is, and I don't particularly like this language myself, but we're saddled with it, is advanced threats. There are advanced threats. And we'll get on in a moment to some of those and what can we practically do about them. I personally prefer the phrase blended threat. Reason being is we've all got lazy over the last 25 years and been weaned into the world of antivirus. Neoplatonic, naughty list, nice list, good and bad. The world just isn't that simple anymore, but unfortunately lots of us have got the mentality of the machine might be dirty, I perform a scan, the scan finds the bad things, and at the end of it I'm clean. That's great for viruses. It's no use whatsoever for advanced threats. Why? We'll come on to a bit more detail in a moment, but a number of the component parts of an advanced threat will be of themselves innocuous. A nice example of this is the Flame attack. Flame uses the Lua coding platform. Some of you may be familiar with that. I can see some people smiling happily that I've mentioned Lua today. I've made your day for you. Some of you are looking completely confused and what on earth is he talking about? Lua is the Portuguese word for moon, and Lua was actually written by a research team at the University of Rio de Janeiro in 1993. And Lua is used for a lot of gaming platforms for coding. Of itself, it's completely innocuous. It's neither good nor bad, but it's mostly benign. The reason Flame uses it, the whole Lua language compresses to 300K. And all you need to use it is any machine with a C++ compiler. It's actually very difficult today to find a machine that doesn't have a C++ compiler. It's included as part of the payload of Flame, so that whoever it is that's behind it, whichever government or intelligence agency, if they actually get to a compromise box and find of all the exploitative things that they did, there's something they've overlooked, they've now got a coding platform to code on the fly and add in the things that they didn't do. This is a very sophisticated attack. Also, the problem with the AV approach to things is dirty, scan, clean. i.e., I've got a fixed state of the machine. These advanced threats have been specifically coded to evade detection, not to be found. So guess what? Even when they do a bad thing, they don't do the bad thing all the time. They're commandable. There's a command and control element, and they will switch on, do the bad thing, and switch off, knowing that you don't constantly scan. And that's a large part of how they evade detection. You can't just scan on a one-off basis and go, I've scanned and there was no problems today, we'll do it again next week. You need to look at behaviour over an extended period of time, but we'll get into that in a bit more detail in a moment as well. Okay, I'll briefly talk about cyber warfare, but only in terms of the definition we just gave of what cyber means, control. And I don't want to talk about cyber warfare particularly, but what I just want to show you is there's nothing new about it. These 4 quotes from Sun Tzu are from the 6th century BC. And the fact command and control as a concept within warfare is nothing new. I want you all, if you take nothing else away today, to be able to say, look, all this nonsense been talked about cyber warfare, whether it exists, whether it doesn't exist, there's nothing new in that. Command and control is an essential part of warfare, goes back thousands of years. So that's an ancient definition of command and control in warfare, which is taught on military officer and intelligence officer courses. A much more recent definition is from 1996, which is very interesting as well. US Joint Chiefs of Staff's instruction. And you'll notice that the definition includes, I don't want to read my slides out because I hate people doing that to me, but if you can read it there, it includes both attack and defence. To be a poacher, you need to be a gamekeeper. To be a gamekeeper, you need to be a poacher. Back to there's an issue here with those who know do not tell and those who tell do not know, which we'll get onto again in a little while. And very briefly, okay, cyber warfare, what is being attacked and defended? Well, in terms of information, it's these three levels: global information infrastructure, national information infrastructure, defence information infrastructure. The problem is they're not clear and separate. There is a large degree of overlap. A nice example of this is around the world, very few militaries, if any, run their own cellular phone system. They'll have their own encrypted radio system, but almost all of them use a civilian cellular phone system. Therefore, by attacking the civilian phone system, you're likely to have a degree of impact on the particular military. And back to, we were talking about here about botnets. How does that come through to, well, I might be nothing to do with the military, but my home computer may have been compromised by something that is part of attacking national infrastructure. And interestingly, I'll mention the report in a moment, I'll give the details on the screen, but when we say national infrastructure, critical national, the temptation is to think of government systems. The reality is 80% globally of critical national infrastructure actually belongs to commercial concerns, not to the government. Which is interesting in terms of an adversarial military putting together an order of battle and an attack plan, because if you're looking at critical national infrastructure, you're actually more looking at commercial concerns than you are looking at government. Very surprising to a lay person, certainly was to me. And back to my initial point, society is digital. This is the world in the 21st century, whether we like it or not, and whatever this thing that we call the internet is, we're all connected and joined up. And arguably there's no going back. I'll click through this. I've got a lot of ground to cover and I'm conscious of running out of time. So, those of you who've studied this may be aware of the classic information security model taught in almost all faculties around the world. Confidentiality, integrity and availability. Very well known, very useful. However, there's two other models to go with this which aren't outside of barbed wire campuses necessarily taught. And you may not have encountered this information in this way. How an attacker views confidentiality, integrity and availability is exploitation, corruption and disruption. Confidentiality is attempting to use encryption, again as old as mankind communication, to make sure that nobody can read the content of the message unless they're meant to. Exploitation is trying to subvert that to exploit the content of the message. Integrity is making sure, this is the most misunderstood, it's not making sure that there is no change to the data, it's detecting when there is change, because you can't guarantee that you can prevent change. You can guarantee, both academically, practically and mathematically, the detection of change to data. So of course, what attackers are seeking to do with integrity is corrupt the integrity. And availability is straightforward. You know, and some people will try and tell you some of these are more important than others. They're all equally important. You can't separate them. Availability is, can we get access to what we need when we need it? And of course, what an attacker tries to do is to try and disrupt that availability. And the reason it says information security model plus at the top is there are three other levels to this. The first two nicely match each other: confidentiality, exploitation, integrity, corruption, availability, disruption. The last three are a sort of cover-all. They don't match in the same way. But our response to exploitation, corruption and disruption is prevention, stroke detection, response and recovery. Massive areas. And this is a new area globally in terms of maturity and internal ability, and you know, way beyond scan, patch and proceed and scan for AV. If I lift up the stone and find the problems, what do I then do about them? And what can I do about them? Because I want to give you some practical things today. The first thing is, again, a takeaway, data is three-dimensional. What do I mean by that? I don't mean just physically. There are three states of data. Data at rest, ones and zeros, the world of conventional forensics. We take an image. But then we have data in motion. And those of you who've studied information security will know that the problems of securing data at rest are very different to the problems of securing data in motion. And different problems, different solutions. And data in motion is another way of saying communication. And all communication has there's a common denominator, Achilles heel, which is this: all communications can be intercepted. You cannot prevent the interception of communication, which is why we use encryption to try and stop anybody making sense of the content. But all signals can be monitored, even perversely the way around. And if you're super secure, even the absence of signals can be monitored and analysed. It's very difficult to stop interception of communication. And there's massive global industry around that. The third state of data, which is, again, there's some nice tools out there, some very mature tools, but it's an emerging skill area, is volatile data, the contents of RAM. Now that's relevant in terms of these advanced attacks, blended threats that have been written to evade detection. They're very, very good at making sure they've got no presence whatsoever in data at rest. If you scan the hard drive, you won't find any trace of this attack and this compromise. What's impossible for them is twofold. Without making anybody's ears bleed or equally insulting anybody who's deeply knowledgeable about this on the technical side, but when you pass machine code instructions to the kernel of a computer, the kernel of a computer can only run plain code, plain text machine code instructions. You can't encrypt at the code level. So at the point you're passing machine code instructions, and if you've got access at that level of the machine, you can see what the machine's doing. And you can't hide that. Nor can an attacker hide there. So if you're able to see into RAM at this level, and capture the contents of RAM, analyse RAM, now it's non-trivial, it's a huge area on its own, but you will be able to see that there is a compromise on that box from RAM. The problem is, in terms of, this is trivial to show you for a single machine, but in terms of a large network, it doesn't scale. It's like placing a fire extinguisher beside every single device that you have. It's practical, it's sensible, but it's a nightmare to manage, and how do you actually control it and what you're going to do. And it's one thing to say, right, we've got a compromised laptop, let's deal with the RAM. And what about when you've got, out of a data estate of 20,000 nodes, you've got 2,000 that are compromised? Because 2,000 sets of RAM is still linear, a linear amount of data. If there's 32 gig of RAM on each machine, that's 32 gigs of linear data and linear time that will be involved that you need to capture and analyse. And so that, it may be practical on a single machine basis, but it doesn't scale across an entire network. Data in motion is the other place that the attacker cannot hide from us. They can encrypt their payload, but one of the common denominators of advanced threats, blended threats, is that they need to communicate. They need to speak to a command and control server. And when they do, it's possible to see that communication and to analyse the communication. And we're talking here, even on a relatively small network, you're talking about millions of packets. You certainly can't do this manually. You're not going to do this by rolling up your sleeves and wading in. We need something that's at least semi-automated to spot the patterns for us. And there's nothing particularly new about this. This is signals intelligence. We're looking for patterns in communication. Oh, and there's a fourth dimension, of course. When we actually get into an investigation, this will happen over a time frame, which is, I mentioned before, this is exactly exploited by the advanced persistent threat actors. Rather than having it bad all the time and bad at a specific point in time, it will do piecemeal actions, the advanced threat, over an extended period, making it difficult to detect. You need to look for a much longer extended period of time to see what's happening. Very briefly, because I'm going to run out of time, and I don't want to massively get into just RAM, but here's an interesting order of volatility. When we're looking at RAM, how long does that information exist for? And as you can see, it can be down to actually nanoseconds, which for those of you who are computer scientists, raises a very interesting practical point as opposed to the academic. Academically, those of us who've studied computer science, we're all taught about the state of a machine, as if that's a frozen point in time. The reality is there are infinite states of a machine, infinitely changing. And it's very difficult to capture because it's a quantum physics principle. In the time that it takes us to take the image of the data and what's happening, it may have itself changed during that time. Doesn't stop us doing that, but we need to accept and realise that there's various data that we may either never capture or may have changed during the time that we're taking the image, undertaking the analysis. But all the way down to then, obviously, once things are printed off, they last for much longer. But expected lifespan of data. And of course, those attackers that are seeking to exploit this are very interested in getting into very short lifespan, because it's much harder to find. And I've actually taken that from Farmer and Venema, their forensic discovery book, which to my knowledge to this day, 8 years later, is the only Unix forensics book. So what can we actually see in RAM? What we're looking for? Hooks, handles, DLLs, hidden DLLs, processes, services, the VAD tree. This bottom bit is specifically Windows PE32 executables. The PE32, which is the .exe file you may have seen if you use Windows machines, it has a section of the binary that actually tells Windows, because C++ is a compiled language, it tells it a selected highlight summary of the machine code instructions that will be used. Well, from that, it's possible when you're analysing a PE32 binary, before you ever run it or load it or sandbox it, and by the way, sandboxing's dead, forget about sandboxing, but we'll come on to that in a moment, but it's possible from that section of the PE32 to infer what's it doing, because we can see what sorts of machine code instructions it's using. Is it calling crypto libraries? Is it calling TCP/IP libraries? Is it calling DNS? We can see that from the machine code instructions. Now, it's not exhaustive, but it's a very good starting point. Sorry, the text's a bit small here. My next point is we have a big decision, hence my statement about sandboxing's dead. Binary analysis, static or dynamic. Static's fine, but there's limited you can find out, as I mentioned there, VAD tree. The problem with dynamic is most of these advanced threats have been specifically written to detect that they're in a virtual environment, and almost all sandboxes are a virtual environment. The only sandbox that actually works is a true air-gapped live system that runs the code for real to see what it really does. So, for example, has anybody not heard of VMware? Yeah, VMware, great software, but VMware is not. If you're running a Mac like I've got here, and I've got a VM Windows image on there, it's not another backdoor way of having Windows on there as well. What it's actually doing is emulating Windows, and the way that VMware is able to do that is it doesn't run the full Windows environment, even though it appears to. There are many of, on the last screen I mentioned hooks, handles and DLLs, there are many of those missing, there are many of the API calls missing. And what advanced threats do typically is they will deliberately call, as they load themselves up into address space, obscure APIs and DLLs. And the reason they're calling them is they know that virtual images won't have them. Why does it do that? Because it doesn't want to run in a sandbox so you can analyse it. Which is why sandboxing's dead, because blended threats, advanced attacks have been coded from the very get-go to not run in a sandbox environment, to not run in a virtual environment. The only way you can find out what they're actually going to do in the wild is to put them in the wild. But these are the two routes you have available. I'm sorry, the font's a bit small there, but there's a whole range of things we can do when we get into binary analysis as to what's the code actually doing, what's it calling, what other APIs is it speaking to. And that's a whole area of science all on its own. However, two images here. Sorry for the cliches, but the genie is out the bottle and the lid is off Pandora's box. The world has learnt how to exploit computer systems way beyond the viruses of 25 years ago. And a bit like, we have been here before with the Los Alamos project and the race to split the atom. Once the American and UK governments split the atom, even though they went to great lengths to keep how to do that secret, other governments knew it was possible. Once they knew it was possible, they put massive resources into finding out how to do it themselves. Now, some of them found out how to do it via spying on Los Alamos and getting the actual same secrets that had been found. Some of them did it by just studying very hard and figuring out, well, if they can do it, we can do it. And the fact that you know that something is possible, well, this is what's now happened with advanced threats. Every government in the world now has a vested interest, and military, in finding out how to do this. And the fact that they know it's possible makes it worth their while putting substantial resources into replicating it. And we can't go back. That's the point I want to make here. The information security industry is just going to grow and grow and grow, because we're only ever going to see more of these attacks. We're never going to see less. And of course, the other difficulty is there's a researcher from King's College is publishing an interesting book, Thomas Rid, and his standpoint, which is, he's got some very valid points behind it. I don't agree with everything he says, but his standpoint is there is no such thing as cyber warfare, and I don't disagree with him. But the problem is people are going to make these attacks. They won't now stop these attacks. And the difficulty is, and Thomas Rid makes the very valid point, it's very difficult to differentiate in the cyber world between sabotage and espionage. Which is which and what is what. And the difficulty is exactly that. You know, am I being attacked by an intelligence agency after information, or am I being attacked by a military seeking to bring the network down or deny a service or disrupt? You may never know. But we're only ever going to see more of these attacks. So, let's quickly look at Flame and Skywiper. Complex blended attack vectors, backdoor Trojan and worm elements. At this point it becomes fascinating as an analyst. These are all different modules within Flame. For me, this tells me, I can't prove this, but this tells me as an analyst, this is how the team that wrote it were constructed. That they look to deal with every single one of these. And where are those things interesting? Well, that's how we exploit information. And it gives us information about how they've gone about writing the attack. Interestingly, it exploits specifically all of these things. I don't know if you're aware, Flame, if you've got Bluetooth on the machine that's compromised, will actually turn your machine into a Bluetooth base station. Why does it do that? Because guess what? If it can switch your Bluetooth on, it then tries to attack any other Bluetooth device that it can communicate with. This is written, it's really, for those of you who've had exposure to this, this is really demonstrable. This was written by an intelligence agency, because that's what it does. It looks to fully exploit any IT device for information, very rigorously. Somebody has spent a lot of time planning this. I've mentioned the Lua coding language. Again, we're back to this command and control. Interesting as well, it also, Flame contains a fairly cutting edge. Mark Stevens is a researcher from a university in Holland, and he published an attack on the MD5 algorithm, and they exploited that to make your machine think that it was receiving updates from Microsoft when it was actually receiving updates from the Flame command and control server. Sophisticated. And just a screenshot of some of the bits. Again, I could lecture for a whole term on what's on this slide. We're going to pass through it in 30 seconds. The whole of information exploitation is about going from the physical process, what's actually occurring, to wisdom. And the steps in between are, when we intercept communication, it becomes data, and it becomes data from measurements and observations being applied to it. But as we apply measurements and observations to what we've captured, that then becomes information. It's placed into context. There'll be some indexing and analysing. Can we find it? Can we sort it? As we get to the end of that, it goes from being information to being knowledge. We have some understanding from that which we've got our hands on, which is the whole point of intelligence agencies. And then the holy grail and the biggest gap is then moving from knowledge to wisdom. And wisdom is knowledge effectively applied. That's what all of these agencies in the world are seeking to do. And that's why it won't go away. It's why the lid is off Pandora's box. Sorry, I'm very conscious of time. An open problem. Nobody to this day knows the point of infection for Flame and Stuxnet. How does it get into the wild? Where does it originate from? Nobody, no research agency, no government, no private company has been able to track that backwards in the wild. It's felt that it is connected to a known video decompression vulnerability. And interestingly, you may come across So many of these attacks are actually referred to by researchers as tilde platforms, and the reason they're called tilde platforms is one of the things they have in common that gives away that they're written by the same people is the temporary files they create are all prefixed with tildes, tilde D and tilde KWI. Just as a side note, for those of you who are interested, the tilde KWI temporary file in Flame is why Flame is also called by some people Skywiper. It's because of the initials are in that order, KWI, which is why they're in caps there. It's just, it was a name made from the KWI temporary file by the researchers who found it. But they're platform-based attacks. This is a million miles away from what we've become used to with antivirus. Sorry, my images are out there. But aren't there rules about this? I'm going to rattle through this because, again, it's not the main point of what I'm talking about. There's a great report published by the East-West Institute working towards rules for governing cyber conflict. A very unique body. It's a Russian and American research body. Let me just get the image to come up for that. There we go. That's their report. You can get it on the internet. If you just take a note of the title, it's freely available in PDF. And then, interestingly, just this week, NATO has published, and again, it's freely, you can't download it as a PDF, but you can read it online freely. Again, sorry for the size of the graphic, but it's called the Tallinn Manual, and it's the first known military manual on cyber defence. In fact, I should have the name of it coming up. No, I haven't, sorry. It's rules for cyber warfare. Now, where I disagree with Thomas Rid at King's College London is when Thomas Edison and John Westinghouse and Nikola Tesla sorted out AC/DC and grid electricity, it had an impact on warfare. It didn't mean that all talk about warfare from that point was about electric warfare. And what I'd like you to do as an academic exercise today, tomorrow, going forward is the next time you hear somebody talking about cyber warfare, replace the word cyber with electric, and it makes about as much sense. And clearly electricity has had a massive impact on warfare and militaries. But warfare is still warfare, and that's where I disagree with Thomas Rid. There is cyber warfare, very clear, because we're in a digital society. But it's a minor part, and he's quite right, it's not a separate thing of its own. In that respect, I do agree with him. It's not a separate thing of its own construction. It's something that's implicit because it's how society has changed. Please, I can see you, a furrowed brow.
Wouldn't you actually agree that air warfare is different than sea warfare?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
And isn't cyber an environment in the context of it being used, rather than...
It is, absolutely, and conceptually, I don't have an issue with that, and okay. Absolutely, and it is a theatre. I don't disagree that the fifth theatre of warfare is cyberspace. Don't have a problem with that.
That was where
the notion that we could be at cyber war and not at conventional war, I find entirely specious. It's the same thing. If we've gone to war, we've gone to war. What the theatre is, absolutely, and cyberspace as a theatre of war, absolutely, absolutely. But what's fascinating is this is all topical. This is just 3 years of research out of Estonia, just been released this week. Hopefully we're going to see a lot more. Scarily, and those of you with a military background, I know this will resonate with you. It was looked at by military officers. It was written by lawyers. Not a good blend. But that's it. Again, I'm digressing, and it's not what we're in this room for. Again, I don't know if you can see this at the back, but brief outline from the East-West report about the Geneva and Hague Conventions. Very briefly, what I just want to mention here is if we look back to amendments to the Geneva Convention, originally written in 1864, technology in the Geneva Convention is not new. 1928 it was updated after the First World War regarding gases and asphyxiation agents. It was updated again in 1975 regarding chemical weapons, bacterial weapons. Scarily, you'll see here the last amendment to it in 2005. We've gone from really practical things that really affect people in the battlefield. In 2005, we had a protocol amending the Geneva Convention relating to the adoption of an additional distinctive emblem. Do you think we might have lost our way a little bit here? That should have been what we've just talked about, the cyberspace theatre and cyber, and how part of this is what constitutes declaring war on each other. And this is where we get into this, to be fair, Thomas Rid articulates the point very well, this grey area between sabotage and espionage, and intelligence agencies have spied on each other since time immemorial. The fact that you're spying on each other isn't an act of war. The problem is in the fifth theatre, cyberspace, it all becomes very muddied and it really isn't distinct. So, moving on again. It's good exercise for me, this. Interestingly, I mentioned earlier 80% of critical national infrastructure is actually not government. The report goes on to give this great table of, for both Russia and America, what constitutes critical national infrastructure. It's really interesting, really fascinating. Of course, if you're a hostile third party, intelligence agency, military or government, these are the things that you would look to disrupt and cause problems with. The report does go on to mention, which is why I'm talking about it, not only is 80% of critical national infrastructure civilian and not government, 80% of it is also connected to the internet in some way, shape or form. So again, society is digital. Again, just very, very quickly, there's this nice summary of observations at the end. It mentions, as I've just said, number 3, discrimination between military and civilian targets is more difficult in cyberspace and may in fact be impossible. Number 5, non-state actors and netizens can wield elevated power in cyberspace. That's another way of saying asymmetric warfare. In conventional warfare, a single soldier can't take down the entire network. And in cyberspace, the 5th theatre, they can. So there's this disproportionality, this asymmetric warfare element. Point 6 has partly been addressed by the Tallinn report this week from NATO, but cyber weapons have attributes not previously seen with traditional weapons, nor considered during the development of the current LOW, which is absolutely true. That, and this is a problem with law and things like rules of engagement being written by lawyers. Law struggles to keep up with technology, and we have a gap at the moment. Point 7 is my those who tell do not know, those who know do not tell. Military forces have distinct advantages in keeping cyber weapons secret. Of course they do. You're not going to get the American, the British or the Russian government, or the Chinese for that matter, saying this is how we're attacking people. Or the Israelis, or whoever you like, pick any one from. It's in their interest not to say that. Well, the whole thing's all. I'd strongly recommend those of you not familiar with the report to read it. However, I did say I'd give you some practical things. So what can be done now? Don't panic, Mr. Mannering. Keep calm and carry on. Hopefully all of you are aware, this is actually a genuine World War II PR poster. I didn't know as a child, the words carry on to me meant the Carry On movies, Kenneth Williams and Hattie Jakes, and I didn't know that they'd taken the term carry on from this Second World War phrase. But there's a reason for the sheep at the end. One of the practical things I want to give you is, let's all go at the Golden Ram. Sadly, I don't mean the lovely pub in York. I wish I did. What I mean by that is RAM on your machines. Everybody's used to the idea of a golden build for an operating system. I come across globally very few people who've taken a golden snapshot of the RAM on their machine. And you can do that freely. There's free tools available that'll do this for you. I encourage everybody to have a library of known good RAM, ideally 3. Pristine build with APIs building, and I fully accept it's a non-trivial exercise to say what is a pristine build, but pristine build APIs running, pristine build network connected, pristine build internet connected, and there's a reason for that. If I then suspect that my individual machine's been compromised, I take an image of the dirty machine, I have the golden image of the known good and clean, and I just compare them. A differential analysis will show me things like direct kernel object manipulation, where the attackers have actually written in machine code to de-link machine code processes. This is part of how kernel mode rootkits hide themselves in the system. But if you're able to undertake this process, which you can, the tools that you don't even have to buy them, they're freely available. And it's a good starting point in any instant response situation. I think this machine has been compromised. Okay, let's go and get the copy of the RAM from a year ago when it was known good. Let's take the copy that I've taken right now today when I think it's compromised, and let's see what's changed. It's a starting point. The problem is it doesn't scale, but it works for a low volume number of machines. How do I do this on a national and enterprise scale? I don't have an answer to that. However, I said at the start, and we're coming to my end point, all communications can be intercepted, analysed. With advanced threats, blended threats, there are 2 places you can look. We've mentioned RAM. The other thing we can look at is communication, and a common denominator between advanced threats is they will have a command and control server. Botnets have a control point, or control points because it can be distributed as well. We can analyse the traffic. From analysing the traffic, we can see what's going on. Now, this comes up all the time, it's come up for 20 years. Oh, but it's using encryption, and because there's using encryption, you can't do that and do it. Well, hang on. There isn't an advanced threat that I know of that doesn't use strong encryption and doesn't have strongly encrypted payloads. And guess what? They know what they're doing. You're unlikely to brute force into the payload. There's very, very good, very strong military grade, whatever military grade encryption means, and to most military people it doesn't mean much because it's a meaningless statement, but the strongest encryption that's available is available to the attackers. However, they can't encrypt the metadata of their activity. And what we're able to see when we look at things on from a mathematical basis, at graph theory, across multiple dimensions, looking at many, many attributes, behaviours, values, we're able to suddenly see clusters of behaviour, Bayesian inference. And what we're able to see is advanced threats operating. And we see that from watching it communicate. Now, the attractive thing of doing that is it's completely passive. Not only can all communications be intercepted, you cannot prevent interception of communication, and it's also entirely passive. There is no overhead, there is no bandwidth drain. All signals can be split. The simplest example of that is somebody may have chosen, that'd be very strange if they had, but they may have chosen to hide a tape recorder in this room to tape what I'm saying to you. And if they are, great, they've got a copy of what I'm saying, but it doesn't affect what I'm saying as I'm saying it. That's actually true of all of the communication. In fact, what quantum computing is attempting to do is to deliver a practical physical science that will be interception proof, but that's some way away from being delivered. And in fact, there are already attacks available. If you can look up the research papers if you're so minded for attacks on quantum light streams, because light streams can be split as well, and there's no guarantee that the photons will behave in the way that the data integrity mechanism in a quantum device proposes to. However, we're digressing. The point here is if we have the right opportunity and the right technology, we can find a botnet from its communication, from its activity. But that's a mindset change, because everybody's got used over the last 25 years to Neoplatonic signature-based detection. This is the known hash of that virus, of that piece of bad code. If I find that on my system, it's a bad thing and get rid of it. Very old thinking. Not invalid. You'll always need your antivirus, it'll always be relevant, but guess what? The attackers have spent at least 20 years, if not far longer, going out of their way to be able to exploit a system without being found. And a large part of doing that is using benign code that's already embedded in the system. It's almost like cancer, if you like. Cancerous cells are your own cells attacking you. And that's exactly how advanced threats are exploiting computer systems. There may be some elements that are malicious, but because of things like the Lua payload, there's no guarantee that the malicious element will be known as a signature or known to any whitelisting, blacklisting. So that's not invalid, but it's nowhere near as helpful as it was perceived to be 20 years ago. And at the moment there is a massive delta. Machines are being scanned for viruses and coming up clean, yet they're quite clearly alive with advanced threats. And that's another mindset change. The mindset used to be, I've undertaken perimeter and gateway security, I've scanned, I'm clean. As long as I keep clean, I've not been compromised and there's no threat. And sadly, that's just no longer valid. For the most secure, certainly the most secure agencies in the UK have been compromised. The mindset now has to be, starting from the basis of, I am already compromised, can I find it? And generally, if you look at the communication, you will. Because advanced threats without command and control aren't any use to anybody. It will be communicating. The challenge is you need to look at the activity over an extended period of time to see this. Scanning over a few minutes or a few hours won't capture it. It's been specifically coded not to behave in that way.